Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Rams Brothers, the pod. I'm your host, Dean, and I'm joined by the other host of this show, Nick. And Nick, the season is 4 days away from starting for the Rams. Thursday Night Football is tomorrow night. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling super excited. As you know, this episode brings back my favorite segment, Nick's Picks. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. And we got football tomorrow.
Yeah, we certainly do.
Great week.
It's a great week. It's going to be a hell of a season. Before we jump in anything, though, this episode's brought to you by Brewery X, the best brewery in Anaheim. IPAs, hard seltzers, you name it, they got it. Over 30 beers and 10 hard seltzers. Curbside pickup 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Open every day 11 a.m. to midnight. Brewery X is the spot to go, the spot to hang out before the game, after the game, whatever you guys want. All right, let's jump into a preview of the Chicago Bears. Right, we read an article as of recent that the Rams were preparing for Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. Right, I think we're going to get a much larger dose of Andy Dalton, depending on how long he lasts in this game. But Nick, just initially, what are your feels? I know you have probably the Rams and the Bears in your picks later on in the script. So give us your initial thoughts.
Just like McVay, I think it would be naive not to prepare for Fields. I think we're going to see him in some way. He'll probably get snapped the ball a couple times here and there. I think with Dalton in, it's kind of like, I don't know, it feels like a guaranteed win. The Bears are kind of in a difficult spot because you're really going to throw Fields out to Aaron Donald, his first game in the NFL. I mean, it kind of worked for Tua, but the defense kind of led that team to a win last year. So I understand why they're starting Dalton. So, you know, we'll see how that works for them. It feels like we're kind of playing the Bengals week one. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely. No, I get it.
And like, am I jinxing it by saying that? I don't think so, but maybe we'll roll the tape next week and Rams lose by like 40.
Step back, fade away, 3, bang. So that's what you're expecting in this game, Mike Breen. So I get it. I mean, when you look at the offensive line, you look at the offense as a whole, you know, David Montgomery, Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney. Yeah, those are the skill players. But then you move over to the offensive line. It's a massive question mark. And it's led by a player that you and I have watched very closely over the last 10 years in Philadelphia. To me, it's a flat out miracle. Yeah, Jason Peters, that he is still a starting left tackle in this league, despite the fact that he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day, no doubt. But he's 39 years old, and I watched him get exposed countless times over the last 3 years, including a stretch where Carson Wentz was sacked 50 times in 12 games. So, you know, that's a major concern, right? You're bringing in somebody who's on the latter half of their career, somebody that's going to eventually have to protect for Justin Fields' blind side, and the depth there, right? There's a 5th-round pick in Larry Borum, who's, you know, kind of waiting there to see if Jason Peters goes down, right? He's probably going to get some reps. But at the same time, the leader of your offensive line, your left tackle, is 39 years old, and he's not an Andrew Whitworth, 39 years old, right? It's a different situation where he's been battling injuries over the last 3-4 years, right? Knees, ankles, his back, has had multiple surgeries, right? So it's a player that I think they hope could be a stopgap. You know, somebody that can come in and protect Andy Dalton's blind side and then eventually Justin Fields and transition to the next guy. But I don't know. I think there's a reason to be concerned. If you're an Eagles fan, you are also in disbelief over the fact that he's still a starting left tackle. So, I mean, that just to start, the left side of the line, it's going to be a question mark. But then you look over at left guard Cody White. He's a really, really good player. The Bears, I think overall in terms of their offense as a whole, he was graded the highest player in terms of PFF. And he's as versatile as they come, right? He's a guy that can play essentially any position on the line. You got to look for him getting into the second level on rundowns and taking on some of our inside linebackers in the run game. So he's going to be a player that's highly rated, right? He gets a ton of praise in terms of, you know, the Bears' coaching staff and players. So he's the bright spot throughout the entire offensive line. So,
right. On the left side too, especially when you have Peters. I think when you have someone like Peters, I mean, you kind of mentioned Whitworth, even though they don't really make sense to compare them together with a skill set mind frame. But just because you have somebody who's like an old veteran, I think that's one of the main things that Whitworth brings on top of his skill is that he can kind of command an offense, and he's been in the league so long that he really knows what's going on. So I think that's probably why he's there, especially when you have Fields coming in. Besides Dalton, it's almost like having like a coach on the field. So
yeah,
you can kind of see where they're coming from by putting him out there. And maybe he really impressed them in camp. Especially when you have somebody who's like half the age of your starting quarterback out there, just to kind of let him know what to expect. It has to be, because we know how big of a piece Whitworth was to Jared Goff, so it'll probably be the same thing with Peters, if only for like a morale kind of boost, which is very important.
I totally agree on the teacher aspect. The now left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, Jordan Mailata, was on an interview as of recent. I was listening to local radio, and he just praised Jason Peters in terms of his ability to teach, right? His ability to transition players. I mean, if it's not even a left tackle, right, it could be a cornerback, it could be a running back, right? He's just trying to add value wherever he can in any spot of the field. So I understand why they brought him on from that perspective. I just think he's cooked. So we got that.
Yeah.
And then
which is good for us.
Which is good for us. Yeah, and it's good for our edge rushers. And then you got Cody White, again, as I mentioned, as a left guard. Their center, Sam Mustipher, he's only started 9 games in his NFL career. So similar to how McVay has praised Brian Allen all offseason, they're kind of doing the same thing over there. They think he could be a starting caliber center. They're just not sure yet. He's undersized. He's undrafted. And he struggled against run assignments in the preseason. So you talk about potentially a carbon copy of Brian Allen, same exact issues that the Rams are dealing with. I think the teams are just in different spots, right? So I expected the Rams to have a better player than Brian Allen in that position for right now. I'm not comparing the two. It's just a very similar situation where both coaching staffs, players, media is coming out of the Chicago Bears is this guy we think could be a starting caliber center. So we shall see. It's a good opportunity for him to be exposed in week 1 by Sebastian Joseph Day and A'Shawn Robinson. We'll see. So moving over to the right side, James Daniels. He's a former second-round pick who was originally drafted to play center, but he's shown much more promise as a right guard. Kind of familiar to what we're dealing with Austin Corbett. He's coming off of a pec tear. He only played 5 games last season. Plenty of upside, and I think he is going to be trying to play up to his highest level in this regard, right? Because he's going to try to earn a new contract. He's in the last year of his deal right now. So whether that's from the Bears or from a different team, he's going to try to earn his own. So, some potential there on the right side of the line. And then Jermaine Ifetti, a guy that we're all familiar with, spent time in Seattle. He was signed last season to play right tackle. The intention actually was to move him inside, because he struggled so mightily in Seattle as a tackle. And now he's going right back into that nightmare situation of blocking speed rushers coming off of the weak side. And he struggles to get into the second level as well. So we've seen what he's made of. He's going to be on the right side. Jason Peters is all the way on the left side. And then you're really kind of just concerned about the 2 interior guys at right guard and left guard. Outside of that, it's an offensive line that's, could potentially struggle against a really tough front. So
yeah, and you got to think that on top of Dalton is just kind of a recipe for disaster, truthfully. I think if I was a Bears fan, I would just expect this loss. And hopefully you see something out of Mount Montgomery and some of the skill guys, You can't, especially, I know it's a different defensive regime this year. We got a new coordinator, but Rams just made them look horrible last year with Foles. And I don't think Dalton is a huge upgrade on Foles.
No, I don't think so either. It's weird because isn't Foles still on the team?
Yeah, he's third string.
He's a third string guy. Yeah, it's terrible. There's that. It's Andy Dalton. I was watching ESPN the other day. Mike Greenberg on Get Up set the line in terms of sacks for the Rams at 3.5 on Andy Dalton. And guys who are on the show were actually taking the over. So expect
3.5 sacks on Dalton. I would take that over.
Yeah, I expect Dalton to get banged up a little bit. He's a guy that can get rid of the ball pretty quickly, but I expect him to get banged up a little bit just because of the deficiencies of the offensive line. Guys like Leonard Floyd, Justin Hollins, Terrell Lewis, Obo, maybe even a little sprinkle of Chris Garrett. You'll probably see a rotation of all those guys. So expect them to get their own, and obviously Aaron Donald is Aaron Donald. So the Rams at home.
Aaron Donald could get 3
he could.
Sunday.
He could get 3 on his own, on pace for potentially breaking the sack record, which I think is 20 would be 22.5 or it would be 22 total. What are the odds? I think you somebody was telling me that they threw like $10 on Aaron Donald to be MVP and break the sack record. Or maybe it was
MVP of the whole league?
Yeah, I think it's like plus 25,000 or something insane. So if you want to throw $5 on that, feel free.
I don't think betting an MVP that's outside of a quarterback position is a good idea, but
that's the thing. He would have to break the sack record. But the Rams at home last year, they gave up 13.5 points on average at home last season. So they're great at home in terms of defense. Obviously, a new regime, so that's something to monitor with Raheem Morris. But still, the two best defensive players potentially in the entire league you have on your team. So you got to be able to figure out a scheme that works for this team, and I think they will.
Last year they only Bears only put up 10 points, and 7 of them were in garbage time. So
yeah, the Bears were terrible last year, especially that offense was putrid. I mean, we knew we had that game locked in the first quarter.
I think great. I was watching with Bears fans too. Freaking out.
They were being tortured. This Bears defense, you move over to the defensive side of the ball. This Bears defense is a total shell of what it was in 2018. Nick, I know we talked a lot about 2018 in previous podcast episodes, but when they had Vic Fangio and they tortured Jared Goff, and Goff was cold in Chicago and threw a couple interceptions, it's a completely different team now, right? Obviously,
That was the game that stopped the Jared Goff MVP talks. Because he legitimately had MVP talks up until that game. And then
week 13, was that week 12, week 13?
Yeah, it was around that.
Yeah. And that game was pure torture, but at the same time, it's not the same team. It's a shell of what we've seen. It's a new defensive coordinator. And Stafford, I'll get your take on this. He's pretty familiar with what we've seen from the Bears, right? He understands that Khalil Mack is a guy you have to keep an extra eye on. He knows they're tough up front. That they'll try to bang him up a little bit and get in his head. But I don't know. I'm pretty confident in the fact that Stafford is familiar with playing the Bears twice a year for the last 12 years.
Yeah, I think the funny little piece of information I learned today. Before the Goff-Stafford trade, Rams were at 10 wins. Vegas had them at 10 wins over under. And then after the trade, they moved them to 10.5. So not that big of a difference. And I think Stafford kind of gives you that like half edge, mainly because they're playing the NFC North this year. Yep. All of his former teams that he would play against regularly. So I think having Stafford there, going up against the Bears, the Vikings, and Green Bay this year, and even the Lions, because he knows the organization very well, gives them a little bit more of an edge. And particularly this Bears team. I mean, they beat them last year on a game-winning drive without a head coach. They just fired their head coach, and the Lions were able to beat this Bears team when the Bears needed all the wins they could get to get into that wild card playoff spot. So I think having Stafford over Goff here in this game is going to, it's one of the reasons why the spread is 7.5, which is crazy, but I think it's a little too high.
It could be. I think that's a good take. The fact that Stafford has played these teams, right? He has experience, I think puts us in a really good spot. But there's also probably 30 other quarterbacks, maybe 31 in the league that I would take in this situation that could still beat the Bears based on all the deficiencies I've seen on this team, right? They're not going to be a great team this year. It's kind of like a fancy rebuild. Like they're trying to, put lipstick on a pig in this scenario.
Right. I mean, they just drafted a quarterback and he's going to hop in at one, probably like week 3 or 4. You know what I mean? Like
when they're 1-3 or 2-6 or something like that. Right. So
sneakily, I think I really like the Vikings to win that division, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, we'll probably hear that coming up in next picks, will we?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. So you look at the Bears defense. I talked about how they're a shell of what they were, but let's dig into it for a second. Kyle Fuller was cut. He was a pain in the ass for a couple of years for Matt Stafford. Their pass defense, I think, lacks true defensive back talent outside of what they have with Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson. And I think the Rams and Matthew Stafford are going to have plenty of opportunities in this game. I mean, it's still all about Khalil Mack, right? One of the best individual players in all of football, right? Probably a top 10 player in football when healthy and when that defense is clicking. But then you look at some of the other, rising stars in the defense, Roquan Smith, and I mentioned Jalen Johnson at corner. They will have some flashes. And then you look at the rest of the depth chart, you see Alec Ogletree and Robert Quinn and guys that started for the Rams 5 years ago. So
what is it, St. Louis?
It's a combination of players that I think are a little bit washed up, players that are at the tail end of their prime, and then there are a couple of rising stars that still make up the personality of the Bears defense. So they'll still have a little bit of that, right? I still think they'll give the Rams a battle in the trenches a little bit, especially in the beginning, right? When an offensive line could potentially struggle with players in different spots. So an opportunity to see what we got from position players up front. But then these other Alec Ogletree, Robert Quinn, I don't have confidence in them as starters at this point in their career. So realistic positions for the Rams to expose. And I think the other thing to look at, nose tackle Eddie Goldman is on the injury report this week. He's potentially not going to play. So weakens their front a little bit. Obviously, you have Akeem Hicks and Nichols. Those two guys are really tough up front. They're still plenty serviceable. So I mentioned they'll still give us some issues in the trenches, but I have plenty of confidence that McVay has confidence in Stafford and just slinging the ball around and doing what he has to do to win the game.
I don't know if you knew this or not, but I'm going to throw this out there. Stafford actually averages more interceptions than Jared Goff. So just, temper expectations, everybody. I don't want to see another thing on Twitter that says Matthew Stafford is a better quarterback than Russell Wilson. Let's just kind of pump the brakes a little bit, guys. I'm not. We don't have the Messiah on our team.
No, I totally get it, right? I mean, Peter King's article as of recent, right? 6,000 yards, MVP, Super Bowl champion. That's in my dreams. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm in a situation with Matthew Stafford where I'm hopeful. I think I've done some research when we move over to the next segment that will hopefully make you feel a little bit better, just kind of based on quarterbacks that have shifted teams, shifted mentalities, shifted coaching staffs, and kind of got a fresh take on their approach and how far you think you could ride them as a starting quarterback. Deep into the playoffs, deep into a Super Bowl, right? I think those are all question marks with Matthew Stafford, a guy that's played 12 years in the league and still doesn't have a playoff win. So
right.
I completely understand your concerns. And then you see a quote in there. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, here's the example I've been hearing where it's like, oh, well, Brady just went to Tampa and look what he did with all those weapons. He won the Super Bowl first year. And I'm like, are you seriously trying to put Matthew Stafford on the same plane as the greatest football player of all time? No. And if you are, then I'm just going to show you the door because I think you're an idiot.
I get that. I think that, when we get to this segment, I'll give you kind of a preface on how I'm going to structure it. The one thing I wanted to touch on before we get there, Matthew Stafford, the McVay quote, how McVay has recently learned a lot from Stafford.
Can you say it while you impersonate McVay? Can I hear your McVay impression?
I don't think I could do this full of a quote in a McVay impression. But he said it definitely helped him, right? McVay was talking about how Matthew Stafford, just his overall collaboration, his ability to communicate things. He's got such a great lens when it comes to seeing the game at different levels, right? And other coaching staffs have made the same kind of comments as well. But he also said he's got such a great inventory of things and being able to draw on. It's really beneficial for our offense and especially for me as a head coach. So, I mean, all things, Sean McVay hasn't been in the league as a head coach for a fraction as the amount of time as Matthew Stafford's been in the league as a quarterback. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy that has a ton of experience. I don't know if this quote rubs you the wrong way, Nick. I kind of just wanted to get your opinion on the fact that McVay is leaning on Stafford to get more opinion and add layers to his offense.
Well, two things. I haven't heard somebody compliment Stafford this much since I heard Aaron Rodgers talk about him. And my thing with that is, well, it's very easy to compliment somebody you beat 2 times every year for the last 10 years of your career.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's very easy to say, oh, this guy is amazing, because it also makes you look better. And then McVay is, I mean, here's what I take away from Stafford. Who's the amazing Lions tight end? Hawkinson?
Yeah, TJ Hawkinson.
TJ Hawkinson. He's saying, yeah, Stafford was a great guy, but I already feel like I could go to war with Jared Goff. And I mean, I understand that obviously he's going to say that, just how McVay is going to praise Stafford right now because it's his quarterback and, vice versa. So former teammates who are out of the league, Like I think that's probably the only credible source you have right now of people who are hyping up Stafford, because I don't want to hear McVay talk about it. He's just saying how great of a bet he just made it. But obviously he doesn't know what's going to happen with the bet. So, and I'm sure he's learned a thing or two from him. He's an old guy. He's an older guy. He has more knowledge than Goff ever could because he's been in the league longer. It's just how it is. So I don't like to hear I'm leaning on him. I don't think he ever said anything like that about any other of his players. So,
yeah, no, I get it. I think that Matthew Stafford is a guy that, McVay has wanted to lean on, but was he highly desired throughout the league? That's something that was debatable. Obviously we talked about Kyle Shanahan potentially wanting him. I think the interesting thing about the TJ Hawkinson quote with Jared Goff, they're the same age, right? So they're bonding on a different level. Hawkinson was talking about how he just feels like he's more of a friend, right? Somebody that he wants to go to war with because Stafford's a little bit older. He's been around for a little bit longer. And Goff and Hawkinson kind of came in around the same time. So just similar experiences. So I feel like that's where that's clicking and that's where that comment's coming from. Plus you mentioned these guys are switching teams. So you kind of have to stick up for the guy that's there. But just
like how Brockers was like, oh, I think Stafford is a huge upgrade over Jarrett. And then he got traded to the Lions and he was like, well, you kind of just say that just so you kind of hype everybody up and you get the fans going. So I don't, all
weird
of that,
situation.
and like the one thing that's good and bad about McVay is like he's an amazing face. You know what I mean? Like he's a great face of the organization. I was at the Rams preseason game and I've never ever seen a coach like with the silhouette behind him, like as a part of the hype up for like before the game, like as if he's a player. Kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But he's really good at like the politician smile and lie. So it's hard for me to take anything he says at face value anymore. So,
but I mean, from an advertising perspective, why you have to put Sean McVay in that situation, right? I mean, he's the face of the team. So, I mean, it's just kind of what you do from a rebrand from an advertising perspective. You could put a silhouette of him and, it works for the fans because fans worship Sean McVay. He brought a team back to, a winning culture, and it hasn't been like that in 15 years. So as we transition,
he's part of the reason why.
Yeah, exactly. As we transition, this segment, veteran quarterbacks who've switched teams in the last 20 years or so, just kind of measuring some success levels of recent guys who switched teams, what that looked like in terms of what kind of situation they were going into, how the trade was structured, how the trade unfolded, how it worked out for both teams, right? All those kind of things, just as we continue to evaluate the situation that Matthew Stafford's in. I want to preface this by saying this, though. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Kurt Warner, and Brett Favre are all off limits in terms of comparisons because they had already won a Super Bowl prior to switching teams. So I'm not going to sit here and compare the situation with Matthew Stafford to any guy that has already won a Super Bowl because he hasn't even won a playoff game. So I also kind of wanted to keep it somewhat recent. So players like Y.A. Tittle and Fran Tarkenton, they're too far back. Just because how much the league has changed, I wanted to get some kind of recent examples. So I'm going to kick it off with this, Nick, and you'll tell me if I'm off base once I start to dig into it. The first guy that came to mind as a veteran quarterback who switched teams and had some success almost immediately, Jay Cutler. No reaction from you there so far? Okay, good. Traded in.
Jay Cutler went to a Super Bowl, and he's not a good quarterback.
Not quite. He almost did. Traded in 2009, the Broncos. Oh, right. Jay Cutler and a 2009 first-round draft pick to the Chicago Bears for Kyle Orton. The Bears' first and third-round selections in 2009 and a first-round pick in 2010. So similar to Stafford, Cutler requested a trade from Denver, and Denver did what the Lions did and collected multiple first-rounders and a starting-caliber quarterback. So not Kyle Orton never went to a Super Bowl or anything like that, but he was plenty serviceable. He was serviceable enough, in my opinion, to lead Denver to a 500 or so season. He was 7-9 that following year after the trade. And Jay Cutler was coming off of a year in Denver where he's setting passing records, his passing yards, his completions, his attempts were all single season franchise records. And you're talking about a team, Denver, that had John Elway, right? So, I mean, these are pretty significant stats that Jay Cutler's putting up in the modern era, which is why the Chicago Bears were so interested in trading for him. So in Jay Cutler's first year with the Bears, Nick, they started 3-1, then lost 6 of 7. Ron Turner was fired as the offensive coordinator. So imagine starting 3-1 and then losing 6 of 7 with this Rams team.
Bears last year, you couldn't hear them enough say, "Oh, we're 5-1" after they beat Tampa last year. And then they just wouldn't shut up about it, and then eventually bit them in the ass.
That's all they got. But they finished the first season under Jay Cutler. Ron Turner was fired. The Bears finished 7-9, and so far the Jay Cutler project was kind of failing miserably. So you fast forward to the next year. Behind the newly hired offensive coordinator, Mike Martz, the Chicago Bears were 11-5 in 2010 and were the second seed in the NFC. Mike Martz and Lovie Smith were reunited once again. So Greatest Show on Turf was kind of starting to re-evolve through the NFL in modern times, which is kind of really interesting to watch. They beat Seattle in the divisional round in 2010. Then they lost to Green Bay in the NFC Championship game because Jay Cutler tore his MCL I think it was right before the half, sometime in the first half. So there was a lot of controversy. I'm sure you've seen memes if you weren't watching the game live or, whatever it is on social media of him just kind of standing on the sideline. That's kind of where all the controversy started. He said during halftime, he threw a pass and his knee buckled, and there was no chance of him coming back in the game. So the game actually was topped off with Caleb Haney, a guy whose name that I almost completely forgot. The Bears ended up losing the game 21-14, and that was almost it for the Jay Cutler experiment. The next year in 2011, Jay Cutler suffered a season-ending thumb injury after starting the year 7-3, so they were kind of on the same track, but it just wasn't all quite there. And then there was some controversy with Mike Martz and Jay Cutler, and Mike Martz and Lovie Smith, and it eventually led to Mike Martz just flat out retiring from football. So I think just internally, what the Rams are dealing with right now, there's more stability, right? I don't think this is something that's going to crumble over 2 years. And the thing that I look at with Jay Cutler, one, he hadn't won more than 8 games before coming into Chicago. Right. I mean, Matthew Stafford has won 11 games, 10 games, right? He's got a pretty solid foundation. It still wasn't
3
the case.
Seasons where he's won like 10, 11. He has like 5 winning seasons total.
Right. I know. But I'm just saying that experiment was interesting for a couple of years while it lasted. They had a potential to go to a Super Bowl. The Packers won the Super Bowl that year. Right. And Lovie Smith was the head coach. So you had some stability there. The Patriots weren't in it. They were 14-2 and lost in the divisional round to the Jets. So it was just a weird year.
Rex Ryan.
I think all in all, Rex Ryan was a coach that was in the AFC Championship.
Right?
Yeah.
He was a Jets coach. Yeah.
He was a Jets head coach at the time. Yep. So I think the overall transition was really interesting. I give the overall grade of the transition or trade, whatever you want to call it, a C. Primarily because 5 or 6 different offensive coordinators ended up rolling through Chicago in Jay Cutler's tenure. And he ended up, to me, as I evaluate Jay Cutler and what he's doing today and Matthew Stafford and his family life, he's the anti-Matthew Stafford. Jay Cutler is the absolute anti-Matthew Stafford. He's divorced. He's always pissed off, right? And Chicago is where quarterbacks usually go to die. So, but at the same time, if you really want to make a comparison, Jay Cutler in his prime, you're looking at Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes level arm talent. So, I mean, this is a guy who could really play. I just don't know if he really had the winning mentality.
They were a defensive-led team, though, back then. Like, let's not kid ourselves. It wasn't Jay Cutler's Bears. It was the Bears' defense, which has kind of been their MO since '85.
Yeah, and it was Jay Cutler who sometimes they won in spite of because he would throw 3-4 interceptions. So I think he was a little bit more of a wild card. The fact that he played in an NFC Championship game, though, they won a divisional round. They got a bye in a series under Mike Martz. There's some optimism there with the situation I'm trying to compare over the last 10 years, right, with Matthew Stafford.
Blake Bortles played in an NFC Championship game. Like, the boat,
You're right. Fair argument.
Is one division. Like, it's so much more than just the quarterback.
Well, if you go back and look, I talked about him being just anti-Matthew Stafford, which, I mean, on the football field, they may be very similar. But the Bears at the time were also in a really strange position. If you go back and look, they couldn't trade up to get Matthew Stafford in 2009 if they were interested in drafting him, which is why they inquired about Jay Cutler. There was nobody else. Mark Sanchez was drafted 5th in that draft, which kind of tells you all you need to know about that draft. I think Julian Edelman was drafted like 232nd, and he's one of the best players. He's drafted as a quarterback, or he's probably the best quarterback in that draft outside of Matthew Stafford, even though he's a non-quarterback. And then you go to the next year in 2010, right? If they wanted to wait, it was Sam Bradford was the rookie of the year that the Bears went to the NFC Championship. And then the next quarterback drafted off the board after Sam Bradford was Tim Tebow. So, I mean, you kind of had to go with Jay Cutler in that situation. And it was one of the modern takes on trying to take a player that had a really, really high ceiling, was setting records in Denver. You put him in a better situation and see if you could win a Super Bowl with him. The experiment didn't work. So you want to hear the next one I got?
Well, yeah, just funny. I'm just thinking like alternate universe, Bears successfully make the trade for Russell Wilson this offseason, and we have like a completely different podcast right now.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about like Bears QBs and like what ifs now. It's just fun to
Justin Fields could be on the Patriots, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? The other guy that I had in mind that I was just kind of looking through the last 10 years or so.
Just straight up, I just admire this guy. I think he's just like a great quarterback.
I was like, oh no, what is he going to say? The Chiefs, they traded for, this is Alex Smith we're talking about here. The Chiefs back in 2013 traded their second round pick and a conditional pick for Alex Smith. Alex Smith, as soon as he was traded, he went on to lead the Chiefs to 11-4 season, right? He had some success previously, right? He was kind of like, in San Francisco, he was serviceable, right? He was a good quarterback, but they were looking for somebody to take him over the top. Andy Reid thought that Alex Smith was that guy at that time. Keep in mind, Andy Reid had never won anything at this time. So he was still trying to work out the kinks. He was the head coach. Yeah, you're right. He had been there plenty of times. He'd been to a Super Bowl, but never won anything. Doug Peterson was the offensive coordinator of that team. We know that they both went on to inevitably win a Super Bowl. But it's interesting because you take a Chiefs team that was 2-14 the year prior, before Andy Reid gets there. They have the first pick in the draft. Andy Reid goes Eric Fisher with their left tackle of the future, which was a great pick by Andy Reid. He went on to win a Super Bowl. And then
that is taking best player available.
Yeah. Well, Andy Reid was a very good drafter throughout his time in Philadelphia. And now with the Chiefs, he's been unbelievable. And they traded their top pick in the second round to the 49ers for a guy who had a below 500 record in 6 of his first 7 years in Alex Smith. So again, you're taking a huge risk on a guy. Alex Smith, he ended up going 11-5 in his first year, and then 8-8, and then 11-5, and then 12-4, and then 10-6. But they never made it past the divisional round. But I mean,
what's his name? Oh God, I can't. Gad Flangett, Dag Philip Rivers number. You know what I mean? Just like kind of just making it there, but never really getting past that threshold.
Yeah, solid. Been solid throughout his entire career, but was never able to make it past that threshold. Alex Smith is that guy. But Nick, if you look at it, they won more than 11 games or more 3 times in a 5-year stretch. So, and it's a guy,
really good.
A guy that hadn't won more than 8 games 6 of his first 7 seasons in the league. So, you talk about just a transition. This is a team that went from 2-14 to 11-5 in one offseason with Andy Reid. When you fast forward in the 2017, they paid heavily to get Patrick Mahomes. Alex Smith, but the year before, Alex Smith had led them to a 12-4 record and a trip to the divisional round of the playoffs. And they lost. They didn't get there. They didn't, that's what happens. 12-4 record. It's not the guy. You bring in a new coach with a new mentality, and then all of a sudden, you draft a Patrick Mahomes, which is just absurd. Or you bring in Alex Smith. But the Chiefs traded a ton of picks, including 2 first-rounders to move up 17 spots to draft Mahomes with the 10th overall selection after going 12-4 with Alex Smith. So to me, that's pretty crazy. I mean, he was
then Smith, he still played that next season. Mahomes was like, Jordan loving it.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't move on from him right away. Exactly. Mahomes was Jordan Love, just waiting to play. But then when, it was time to take Alex Smith's job, was it an injury? I don't remember. It was an injury that led to Mahomes getting on the field. But I think Alex Smith played that entire year, and then Mahomes played in the preseason, was the starter, and then that was it. But just talking in terms of pure transition, I gave the overall grade a B+, just in terms of being able to acquire Alex Smith, winning 11 games, 10 games in 4 or 5 seasons. And then you look at the transition from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes and what they did to get there. I don't know. I don't care if Matthew Stafford's the guy that is the guy before the guy. You know what I mean? But being so good for that long is something that Andy Reid, Belichick, Harbaugh, Tomlin, right? Those guys that win in December, those are the only kind of guys that can win that many games for that stretch of time. We don't know if McVay can do that yet. So
here's my thing. If you're okay with Stafford being the guy before the guy, then why give up all of that?
I don't think
capital?
I'm just saying that this is a situation where the guy after the guy actually worked out. But I don't think that that's not the situation here, right?
That shouldn't be.
No, they're not.
Unless the Rams have that, they're like 12-4, they win the division like 2 years in a row, and then they lose in the playoffs first round, and then I think McVay will be like, all right, go full Andy on them and just be like, I don't want to play with you anymore.
No, but they would be having to scout a quarterback that's 2 or 3 years out at that point.
Right.
That's craziness. That wouldn't happen.
I would think McVay already has that in the back of his mind. I'm not going to lie. I would think he's already he's watching college football being like, oh, if this doesn't work out, maybe this guy in 2 years.
I think he has scouts that are handling that. I don't think McVay's watching college football right now. But
no, not now. I'm saying
before I got you. But I mean, before Andy Reid, it was Dick Vermeil, Herm Edwards, Todd Haley, Romeo Crennel. I think Andy Reid's just a good example of a top offensive mind who consistently lost for like 10 years, just lost big games, big game after big game. It was like 100%. You're 100% confident that Andy Reid's going to figure out a way to blow it. He's going to call a timeout late. It's going to ruin them. McNabb's going to throw up in the huddle. Something bizarre is going to happen to an Andy Reid-led team. And all of a sudden, you figure out a way to draft a quarterback. You understand the direction of the league, right? You surround yourself with really good assistants. Eric Bieniemy as an offensive mind. Your personnel gets better, and eventually it leads to a Super Bowl. So my only point is if McVay can join that conversation of coaches like Jim Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, who all just coach really well in December, you could eventually enter that conversation and inevitably win a Super Bowl. So,
well, yeah, I mean, that's my thing about McVay. People already put him in that group, and it's just like, hold on, guys, let's get there and let's win first. But yeah. Well, cool. Alex Smith, by the way, is retired, right? He's not on the team right now.
Retired.
He retired after last year.
Yeah, he retired.
Good for him.
We'll come back. Watch the E60 if you haven't, but he's officially retired. The other guy that Sean McVay knows very well, Sean McVay spent a lot of time with. I think he was there even when they drafted him. Kirk Cousins.
This guy may have, I was going to say this. Kirk Cousins, they have the best contract in like all of football. It's crazy.
Yeah,
how much the Vikings gave up to get this guy and how much they continuously pay him, even though I think they're kind of dumb with him if you kind of, hear the tone of Zimmer's voice, and you got somebody like Cousins who's just refusing to get the vaccine and whatnot. So I don't think this is a good move at all, but go ahead.
No, right.
This trade.
I forgot about the vaccine part. No, I just think in terms of a comparison, somebody that played a good chunk of football in an offense that was somewhat successful and then had a really awesome opportunity to transition teams, right? To go somewhere else, to sign with a new team, eventually kind of get a jump start in his career and try to win playoff games.
Sign with a team that was just in the NFC Championship too. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. They got him right after Keenum brought them to almost the promised land. And then you got Cousins who hasn't been able to get back there. So.
Right, which is why I initially thought that they could win with him. But Cousins, the reason why they traded for him, I think, in 2016, the Redskins missed the playoffs. Now Washington football team missed the playoffs. Cousins led the team to a winning record 8-7-1, and finished the season with a career high 4,917 passing yards, which was third behind Brees and Matt Ryan. He broke various personal records, team records. He set the previous year. His 67% completion percentage ranked 7th overall, and his 45.7% deep ball completion percentage ranked 5th among NFL quarterbacks in 2016. So Sean McVay's offense fully implemented, Kirk Cousins at his very best, and he had a Jared Goff-like game the following year against the Vikings, actually in 2017, which is during the year, I think it was the second consecutive year where they placed a franchise tag on him. But he flashed. He threw for like 400 yards in that game.
That's the do like that game, right?
Yeah, it might be. Yeah. So the Redskins knew that they weren't going to sign him to a long-term deal. So I think the Vikings in that game were like, oh, we have an opportunity to bring in somebody, who's a level up, clear level up from Case Keenum, and somebody who could potentially take you to the promised land. So Kirk Cousins put together 4 really solid years. I think it was 3 consistent years of over 4,000 yards under Sean McVay. He goes on to sign the biggest contract in NFL history at the time with the Vikings, as you mentioned. So yeah, I would agree that he does have the best contract in football.
Like they can't even cut him. Like it's crazy how tightly wound that contract.
No, they may try to trade him after this year, but he hasn't won more than 10 games in his entire career. I don't know. He hasn't won more than 10 games once. His best record as a starter is in Minnesota at 10-6 or 10-5. And then I think he sat the last game, or he was hurt. I don't know what happened, but he hasn't come within 600 yards of the 4,917 that he threw for in Washington under Sean McVay in 2016. So the Vikings are still looking to get the most out of him. I don't know if he's going to be able to lead them deep into the playoffs. I don't see it this year with Minnesota's roster. We'll probably have to bring in a Vikings expert to give us some deeper analysis. But
I really like them this year. I think they're like a sleeper pick to go pretty far in December, truthfully.
Yeah, I guess.
I think they have great weapons. And I just think Cousins is kind of due, but I don't see them, getting past the NFC Championship game.
No, I don't either. But I mean, again, it's a sample size where Sean McVay was running the entire offense. It was all his scheme, right? His ideas. And that offense actually clicked, right? There was a period of time where they were a high-scoring offense. And Kirk Cousins was flashing arm talent. Also his mobility, right? I think he is underlooked in the earlier phases of his career as a runner as well. So you had somebody that had some mobility. McVay will praise him all day long. I'm surprised he never ended up as a Ram. But at the same time, you have a player that you thought was going to be somebody that can go in and win a Super Bowl. 3 guys really in Cutler, Alex Smith, and Kirk Cousins that you thought could be guys that you could bring in 2-3 years and you're going to win a Super Bowl. And none of that happened. And none of them had won a Super Bowl prior to being traded or to signing with a new team. So I felt like they were all fair comparisons. The other guy,
I don't think history is really on our side.
No, well, it may not be. The honorable mentions, players that also didn't win a Super Bowl but were successful with a different team. Michael Vick, the comeback from jail, where he spent 2 years in jail and then played in Philadelphia, really very successful. So there was
from jail.
Was that I think it was under a combination of Andy Reid and then I think it was Chip Kelly, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Andy Reid, yeah.
It was Andy Reid. And then Drew Brees, only 5 years in San Diego. So he didn't really make my list in terms of a comparison. And it was a shoulder injury that inevitably moved him to New Orleans. He spent much more time in New Orleans and went on to win a Super Bowl. And he was just so young in San Diego, and I just think they wanted to move on from him. And then Rich Gannon is another guy. I think he's a little bit too far back. His resurgence, though, after the Chiefs let him walk to Oakland was pretty remarkable. His body of work was not impressive before the trade or prior to I think the Chiefs released him in I think it was like 97 or 98. But he was a true gunslinger at heart. Fans appreciated him. I know Raiders fans loved him. They took him to a Super Bowl, and the Raiders won 10 games, I think, in 3 consecutive seasons. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, another guy that out of nowhere kind of comes and takes an organization. I think that was the year that the Raiders went to the Super Bowl, was the Tuck rule was established with Tom Brady. Or was it was the year prior. And then
I was going to say, the year that was established, the Raiders lost in the NFC Championship because of that rule. And then the dynasty continued with Tom Brady after that.
Yeah, I think that was the year after.
They beat us.
Carson Palmer is another guy that I had on my list. He was traded from Oakland to Arizona and had a resurgence, obviously started his career in Cincinnati. So the resurgence was kind of like Kurt Warner, where he went from one team, was successful, went to another team, was not successful at all for about a couple of years, and then went and had a resurgence and almost took his team to a Super Bowl. Carson Palmer, when he was traded, had a resurgence at the exact same age that Matthew Stafford's going to be this season at age 34. He won 29 of his first 38 games with the Cardinals, including a 13-3 season in year 3 that was coached by none other than Bruce Arians, who just won his first Super Bowl. They went on to lose the NFC Championship that year to Cam Newton and the Carolina.
It's crazy because I don't even remember that team. I just remember Cam just bowling everybody over until the end.
That was a team that could have very well won the Super Bowl. That Arizona Cardinals team was really good. Larry Fitzgerald in his prime. They had talent all over the field. And then the other guy too that I wanted to mention, Phillip Rivers. Him and the Chargers mutually parted ways for after 15 seasons, and Rivers went on to lead the Colts to an 11-5 year. It was actually the tiebreaker. I think that both teams were 11-5 in that division last year. I'm trying to think who else. It was the Titans. Yeah, Titans and the Colts had the exact same record, but the Titans owned the tiebreaker. So the Colts had to play the wild card game, and they lost in the wild card game to Buffalo 27-24.
Really close game.
Really close in the end. Yeah. Crazy.
I mean, I don't know. I guess Rivers is really old, so I understand. But I would have I would have rolled the dice with him one more year, honestly. Especially after this Wentz stuff was coming out, and it's I'm not going to get vaccinated. I got injured. All the crap that he was dealing with in Philly, he took right with him to Indy. I'm not a good leader. All this stuff. And Rivers even came out. It's crazy how Foles and Rivers both campaigning for that job. They were like, I'll come back, I'll play with you, Frank. Yeah. And they're like, no, we're going to stick with Carson. But he did a really good job last year on the Colts, who have a really good defense and who just can't seem to get that quarterback situation right after Andrew Luck retired. It's just a shame.
Yeah, you could tell they were on the cusp of being a playoff team the year prior to bring in Phillip Rivers. They were 7-9. And then they had a real opportunity to be with that defense. You mentioned a Super Bowl caliber team and just fell short. But I mean, he's a decent improvement. You talk about a guy just over 1 year that could just kind of come in and be a stopgap. Phillip Rivers was that guy. So I don't know. Just because of the amount of time he spent in San Diego, I didn't feel like he was as valid as a comparison as the other three guys. So there's, and then I mentioned,
and it was only 1 year on the Colts. Yeah. It was truly an experiment.
Yeah, we mentioned Peyton, Tom, Kurt, and Brett are all off limits of this list. So, all right, that's all I got for you guys. Keep those three players in mind throughout this entire year. All right, guys like Alex Smith in their first year, Jay Cutler, Kirk Cousins, all guys with superior talent. The one disclaimer I want to call out, I think Matthew Stafford's better than all three of these players. I think Matthew Stafford's had a better career before being traded to the Rams than all three of these guys had prior to moving. And I think Matthew Stafford has more upside being paired with a coach like Sean McVay in a high-powered offense with the first overall defense rolling over from a year prior. It's the best situation that any of these guys could potentially be in based on –
I mean,
it's
a no excuses situation.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what it is.
But I think
you have no excuses to not lead this team well. So
yeah, I just wanted to do our due diligence and see how history played itself out, right? Because if there's something that we can compare it to, I think those three guys are the best example within the last 10 years.
I agree.
So, cool. What's next?
I think we're gonna hop into next picks. You said Matthew Stafford is better than all those guys. I would argue that Alex Smith they're very, very similar. But let's go right into next picks.
Stafford's way better than Alex Smith.
We'll see. Week 1, NFL Knicks picks. We are back with everyone's favorite sweaty segment from your unapologetic uncle. Welcome back to Knicks picks. A lot has changed last season. We're sponsored. We went over 65% last season with our picks, so I recommend you turn up the volume and put some fun money aside, make some money in these games. Dean, welcome back to this segment. I know I've corrupted you and made you a gambler like the Wario Waluigi that we are. But before we get started, do you have any Dean's locks to start the season? Just FYI, guys, Dean went 0-16 last season on his locks.
Wait. Let me make sure I'm reading that correctly because
He did it. He did not go 0-16. I think he lost 5. But he also, like, every week he's like, oh, I'm going to take the highly favored box. Like, you just make like a minus 300 money line lock. So
before you just rip me to shreds, why don't we just continue with your picks, and then maybe you'll get one of Dean's locks throughout the way.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'll just get started.
Yeah, fine.
So like we were talking about, first game I have Vikings at Bengals. We're going to start with Captain Kirk minus 3.5 for a number of reasons. The main reason being the Bengals haven't won a week 1 game since 2018. And I thought it was going to be longer than that. I thought it was going to be like 2016, but they actually have won a couple week ones. 2018 was the last time they won. They almost squeaked a win out last year against the Chargers, but lo and behold, they squandered it away, only achieving 4 wins total last season. This pick really isn't based on what the Cardinals have done right, more so about what the Bengals have done wrong. They haven't even tried to address their O-line. They went out and got, what's his name, Jamar Chase, who had a horrible preseason. Mixon hasn't had a good year in ages. Most stay-away person in fantasy I've ever seen. And then when it's all said and done, Burrow will probably end up being a Matthew Stafford, a quote-unquote savior of the franchise, but really he'll lead them nowhere. But the town is so used to losing that they'll love him for being a warrior hunk who can compete on a bad team. So Jefferson and Kirk connect often. We get a 17-34 win from the Vikings, handsomely covering the spread week 1.
I like the Bengals to cover.
2.5? You like them to cover?
Yeah.
Yuck.
Week 1's unpredictable. It's in Cincinnati. Burrow's healthy. He's got more weapons this year. Offensive line's better.
All right. Is that your lock? Or are you just
No.
Okay. So we got Steelers at the Bills. I like Steelers +7. Dean, I am so tempted to take Steelers money line at +275. Oh, so very tempted. But new year, new me. We're going to try and be smart this year and not go for those yummy Wario money lines when we like the spread so much. People were quick to call the Steelers pretenders last year after coming to a sorry conclusion against the Browns in the playoffs, saying it was the start of a new era. But I don't know if you watched that game or not. The Steelers made it a game after essentially like giving the Browns 14 points to start. So I don't really think that's fair. I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers are legitimate contenders, and let me tell you why. Kind of obvious. They've had no losing seasons under Tomlin and Ben. They've improved their offensive line. They have fun young receivers and a defense that will sack you consistently. And yeah, the Bills are good. There's a high chance they win this game. But to stomp on the Steelers week 1 so hard that they win by 8, this is a revenge game for the Steelers. The Bills were the team that gave them their first loss last year. So Big Ben is now a hunk, apparently, according to reports. My score prediction is 24-21. I think the Steelers win on a field goal. But I think they easily cover that +7. I think that's a little insulting to what Tomlin has made for that organization.
Steelers lost a lot on their offensive line. I wouldn't call it improved. I think they're going to try to be run heavy, more so than they were last year. But you're still going to resort to old habits, right? They're still going to want to air it out. You said they have young, fun receivers, wacky receivers. It'll be a game. It'll be a shootout, high scoring. I'll take the over. Outside of that, I'm completely staying away from it. Okay.
So next game, we got Seahawks at Colts. I think there's a lot of money to be made this year betting against the Colts. While their defense is stupendous, I don't trust Carson Wentz to do anything of value. He was ranked 32nd among all QBs last year. He was benched. He can't get vaccinated. He's not a leader, and he smells, probably. I don't know. I'm not even sure if he's cleared to start. I think he is, but I'm not even positive. And
He's starting.
He is. He's definitely starting.
Yeah, week 1 he's starting.
We'll see. The Hawks, on the other hand, always play well to start the season. Russ will cook in Indy. DK Metcalf will most likely get in the end zone. Every year I loathe the Seahawks, but God damn it, I respect them. 14-29, Seahawks win easily. A statement win, and then everybody's going to talk about Russ MVP. And then I got a little fantastical parlay as one of my picks. I got to bring the Rams in here somewhere. I got Rams.
I think I like this.
Rams money line and Tampa Bay money line ends up being like minus 140. So it's not even an underdog. But let me tell you why it's not. Sean McVay undefeated in week 1. Boom. Like already, we talked about how Stafford knows the Bears, so I'm not even going to get into that. I don't see a universe where Tom Brady loses week 1 against the Dallas team. I think I'm the only one who's watching Hard Knocks. The team has no fire. They have no true leadership. It's filled with homegrown Cowboys who have yet to prove themselves. The Cowboys, I feel like, go out of their way to not find free agents and be like, we like the guys that we have on our team. Zeke, I think, is past his prime. Dak is still kind of injured, and I love Dak. I think he's a top 10 quarterback. I would even rank him above Stafford if he's healthy. But I just don't think he's fully healthy. Am I the only one that's watching Hard Knocks? Like, you can't hide that stuff, and it's a shame because I probably wouldn't be making this bet if I didn't watch Hard Knocks because I would think Dak would be healthy, but it doesn't seem like he is. So that bet I feel really confident about. And then my quick pick, I do these once every week. It's just kind of like not a lot of thought. They're just kind of like throw money at it. I'm going to go Jags money line. This game's going to come down to a weird fumble or a goal line interception. Both teams are so inexperienced. It'll be like watching a JV game, but I'm going to put my luck on Duval Nation. So let's run it back real fast. We got Vikings minus 3.5, Steelers plus 7, Seahawks minus 2.5, Rams and Tampa Bay money line parlay, and then Jags money line. I think I feel pretty good about this week. I would give it a B ranking. We'll see what it's like next week. But Dean, what do you think? Do you like those picks?
No, I think it's solid. I would legitimately put money and tease down the Rams and Tampa. Right? If you can get them at like minus 140, I think that's safe money. Probably the safest money you could place throughout. The only other game I would take a look at, which I know you want to stay away from, is San Francisco and Detroit. Right? I think San Francisco can cover that spread. I think it's at 6.5 or 7.
No, it's like 7.5. I think
7.5. Okay, so that's another one that I think you could kind of take a look at if you want to keep in the mix. If you don't want to take the Rams, if you don't want to take Tampa, you can mix in San Francisco as well because I think they have one of the highest money lines. I think they're like minus 360. Rams are minus 380, something like that.
See, if I was betting with my heart, I would probably be like Lions plus 7.5 because I want to see Jarrett do well, but legitimately I can't place that bet. I just don't think with that defense, how Goff has struggled against San Francisco in his career, it would be an anomaly if they win that game. The Lions money line's like plus 300. So
we'll be the biggest Lions fans ever that week, but or this Sunday rather, but
they have a really tough start of the season. The Lions have a really tough schedule.
Yeah, that's why they're 5.5.
Yeah,
it's gonna be tough. All right, Rams fans, 4 days till the season. We're gonna be here. I'm actually going on my honeymoon. Getting married in 2 days, and then I'm going on my honeymoon. I won't be around for the first 2 weeks of the season. Nick, it's on you, bro. You
on my shoulders.
And Ryan, the boss, probably sprinkle in Dad, maybe Uncle Jim Everett will jump on. Who knows? Which would be amazing. You and Jim Everett on video. I would pay to watch that pay-per-view.
So would I.
So there's that. But other than that, I mean, the season's right around the corner. So we're going to be here through everything, even though I'm not going to be around. But I'm ready to go. I know you are too.
Give me your score prediction for Rams game, Rams Bears. Let me just get that real fast before we sign off.
All right, let me go 38 to 17 Rams.
Wow. I don't think they'll score that many points. Probably like 24-10, the exact score of the last season.
Yeah, I'm going 38. 38 is my number, so I'm rooting for that.
Nice.
I think they go over 30. We'll see.
All right, brother. Great episode. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening.
Peace out. Don't forget about Brewery X. Grab a nice cold beer and enjoy the game.
All right. Peace.